Coach, I can remember being a young head coach. I didn't really spend time as a coordinator as a young coach because I got my first job when I was 26. But I can remember the first time I was riding a bus home, and I had a veteran guy on my staff, and we had just played terrible, and I just thought the end of the world was coming. And he said something to me that has resonated with me through my entire career. And if you don't take anything from this one clinic, take this piece. He said to me, he said, George, it's never as good or as bad as it seems. Wait till we look at the film. And boy, did that not just resonate with me when I got back to the house that night and threw that film in and started watching and realized that, yeah, we had gotten beat up pretty bad on the field on the scoreboard, but it was just little things that needed to be fixed that would have um, change that thing. So sometimes, that's the truth. The film helps, but other times, bad film triggers emotions before clarity. You look at the film and you're not paying attention to the little things. You're just seeing the little run, the long run or the long pass, but you don't recognize that really that occurred because one guy filled the wrong gap, or it was a bad drop by the DB, or whatever the situation may be, or one guy missed a block, or we stepped with the wrong foot. So you're just emotionally involved in that part where you're just like, oh my God, what are we going to do? We can't stop this, we can't stop that. And urgency, increases faster than understanding. It's only when you slow yourself down and you look at that film and you say to yourself, okay, if we would have come off that double team a little flatter, then that play would have hit and we wouldn't have got hit in the mouth. Or if we would have taken a better kick step, you're finding these little details that become clear to realize, man, it's not as bad as it looks. It's not, oh my God, the sky is falling. The sky is falling. And that usually happens in the first 24 hours. You watch the film, you're still emotionally invested in it, and you're just so urgent. You're trying to figure out how you're going to go into your staff meeting on Sunday and explain to the head coach, okay, this is what happened, and this is what we're gonna do, and we got to change this, we got to change that, and that's when you really, really, really need to take a deep breath and understand that bad film creates false urgency. All right, coach. So now we've kind of got past this idea of, freaking out after seeing the film the first time and just kind of losing your mind. And now it's time to start getting that thought process to what the difference between making corrections and making wholesale changes actually looks like. So corrections fix execution. Am I stepping with the right foot? Is my hat placement right? Is my eye progression being corrected? These are all things that are corrections. Changes, however, are when you do things like add formations, change up your front, go max protect when you're a 6 man pro kind of guy. So changes actually alter your identity, and a lot of times that to a lot of young coordinators is the answer. We're just going to change. We're going to go to an odd front, or we're going to go from quarters coverage to be a 3D team because that's what I'm good at. And you just kind of change everything wholesale instead of making actual detailed specific um corrections. And that's when you have to kind of go back to the simplicity of the thing, and understand that when you're doing that, when you're making those kind of changes, you will talk about this later in the clinic, but when you're doing those kind of wholesale system wide changes, it makes it actually harder, and it doesn't fix anything, it just adds to the problem. All right, coach. So, what does panic actually look like? Well, there are some common overreactions that a lot of coordinators, both young and a little bit older, make after seeing some bad film. And most of these things are going to make the week harder on the kids, harder on the coaches, and really not give you the results that you're going to want on Friday night. So, the first one would be like over adjusting scheme. The answer is never to do more, guys. I learned that being an air raid guy. When I first started out with the air raid, you guys have followed me for a long time, know that story. But, one of the things that I learned from Coach Mummy and And in a conversation I had with Coach Leach one time, he mentioned to me, what do you think about this play that they were all talking about? We were all having dinner. And I said, well, I like it, but I'm thinking, what do I have to take out to put that in? And he looked at me really quick, and that little smirk that he always had. And he said, you get it. And that's really the concept that makes great coaches great, is that you really understand that the least you have to teach and the least your players have to learn, the better they're going to play. But one of the first overreactions we are all guilty of it, is when we play bad and the film looks terrible, we want to over adjust everything, including the scheme, adding coverages, doing this blitz or changing that. And that's just really, really hard. A lot of times we'll pull the plug on a personnel prematurely, especially if you're more of a two platoon kind of guy and you got a big time defensive lineman or something like that. Next thing you know, you're going to be tempted to put him at offensive tackle. Um, I can remember early in my head coaching career, we had a kid that was a really, really good defensive lineman, but he was probably our best right tackle as well. And then we had another kid who was, pretty average, but worked hard, played hard. And I could remember, wanting to play the defensive lineman at right tackle, and Coach Salas, who was on my staff at the time, he looked at me and he said, in the fourth quarter, when that right tackle is at 75%, is he going to be better than this other kid at 100%? And the answer was no. And so we didn't change personnel prematurely, and that other kid ended up being a solid 2-year starter for us, and the defensive tackle ended up being just a dominant defensive player because he didn't have to go both ways. And then, the last piece that's probably one of the common overreactions after bad film is that you want to overcoach practice. You feel like you got to coach more, you got to do this more, you got to add this drill, you got to do these kind of things, but it really doesn't help. What you really should do is have that Navy SEAL mentality of, when things go back, revert back to the basics. Still do your tackling drills like you always do. You don't need more tackling drills, you need more efficient tackling drills. Practice, alignments and stunts and things like that. And especially as a defensive coordinator, sometimes you just feel like you got to go out there and you got to run pursuits and you got to do this and you got to do that. Really, you might want to slow down, get them on the barrels, and make sure everybody's lined up and everybody understands where they fit in the scheme. And if you can prevent yourself from having these common overreactions, you'll help yourself have a little bit more clarity about and keep your identity sound and trust the system that you've built. So now that we've kind of been able to explain to you, get a little calm and start thinking about how to fix your execution, you have to know how to do it within your system. And so identity is the lens, not the variable. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're a spread team, you live on throwing the ball inside zone, RPOs, those kind of things. And on Friday night you missed a bunch of combo blocks and you gave up some pressures and things like that. Timing was off, QB was all over the place. And then you get back to Saturday morning and you're looking at the film in your living room or wherever you guys are, and you say to yourself, okay, we need to move under center, we need to put in bigger people, we need to max protect more. But that's not correction, that's changing your identity. And so that's what we mean by identity being the lens, because if you really think about it, look at your inside zone. The scheme itself wasn't the problem, it was the backside guard coming off too early or too early. The RPO wasn't clean for whatever reason because of some indecision. So you just got to look at it in terms of what you're doing. Your execution problems should be fixed inside of that. Say, all right, guys, we got to work on that double team because we know we got to stay on that scoop block or whatever it is you're working on. In your screen game or whatever that is, because your identity is how your kids see the game. And if you change that, then you change the rules for them. And if you change the rules for them, they start thinking. And then the more they think, the slower they play. So then we start talking about, okay, how do we fix these problems? The pressure was because the back wasn't scanning right, or the quarterback wasn't dropping into the, dropping straight back. He was drifting one side or the other, and it was causing pressure. Maybe his feet just got a little happy, or maybe they just had a really good defensive lineman and you couldn't block him. Those are always things you can work on, but you can work on your double teams. You can work on your pass protection drills. So maybe on Monday we don't install more stuff tough, we go fewer formations, same concepts, clearer rules, and more reps on core calls. Joe Montana was asked one time how Bill Walsh called plays inside the 20-yard line, the red zone, because they were very successful. He said he called base offense. He said because that's what we had the most reps at. And so when you're changing your identity, you're making multiplying the number of decisions that have to be made, which isn't clarity. And kids with cloudy minds and staff members with cloudy minds are not going to perform at the level that you want them to do. So think about terms of fixing things inside your system and don't make those crazy changes. All right, coach. So it's Sunday afternoon. The film we already know wasn't great. You found out that you had some protection issues. You had a couple of chances in the red zone where you didn't convert. And the urge is there for you to just say, look, man, we got to add some stuff. We need new protection. But this is where we look at what we call our game week decision filter. That's our mental filter where we say, all right, this is game week. We shouldn't be designing, we should be clarifying. Your design work it happened in the offseason during your install. By Monday of game week, the system is already built. Now your job is to filter decisions, not create new ones. So you and your staff have to sit down and say, okay, this is the fix we think we need to add. Does it fit inside our identity? If it doesn't get in. You don't add a new protection scheme because of because of one pressure look. You tighten rules inside that your regular protection. You don't install a new concept because coverage started rolling late on you. You rep the concept you already run and coach it more clearly, because Friday night decisions should already be decided. Your call sheet shouldn't be a collection of Monday emotions. Let me say that one more time. Your call sheet shouldn't be a collection of Monday emotions. It should be a result of months of structure. This filter, it protects you from emotional thinking. It says emotion says we have to change something. The filter, it says, is this an execution issue? Have you seen this problem repeatedly? Can this be solved with emphasis, not structure? If the answer is yes, you're correct. You don't redesign. When coordinators skip that filter, Tuesday practice turns into install. Players feel the shift, rules change, thinking increases, speed drops. But when you use the filter, practice looks clean, meetings are calm, your players hear the same language, confidence stays intact, and that's what protecting identity in game week really means. You don't let one game rewrite your system. You let the system guide how you fix the game. All right, coach. It's Monday morning. You walked into the staff room after a bad game. You don't say anything dramatic, but you move faster. You're talking sharper. You're flipping through the call sheet quicker. You think you're problem solving. Your assistants, however, see uncertainty. They read your emotional state before they hear your words. This guy, he's flying around, and it makes everybody nervous. Tone moves faster than language. Really, really important concept. And then, so now they notice what you start emphasizing, what you're questioning, and what you're talking about first. If the coordinator feels unsettled, the room feels unsettled. Staff understands confidence immediately. And it's uncertain leaders create anxious staffs. Really, really important. So now, if you're in there, you're flipping through this thing. We're doing the things we're talking. You're talking about doing. You're talking fast. You're obviously unsettled yourself, like we just talked about. Now your O-line coach is over there thinking, man, are we adding protections? Your receiver coach is saying, oh man, are we changing route structures? The QB coach is thinking, man, reads are changing, and so all these things are causing problems in the assistant's head, because all they really want to have is a direction. Tell us what to do and tell us how to fix it, and let's get it done. And then so now we're really looking at the meetings are speeding up, coaching points multiply, corrections turn into overcoaching, and then the panic you felt quietly on Monday spreads through the staff and lands on players by Tuesday. You know, strong coordinators understand this kind of stuff. That's why after bad film, they slow down instead of speeding up. They open the meeting with clarity. Hey, this is what we are. This is what we're fixing. Nothing else changes, because the staff doesn't just follow your play calls. They follow your emotional temperature. All right, coach. Another problem with bad film and being unsettled as a coordinator and just kind of being willy nilly and not really being having a clear plan on how to fix things is that bad film often ruins Tuesdays. Most people, Monday's about install game plan and things like that, but Tuesdays your really big work week and too many correction or work day of the week, but too many corrections. Enter practice on Tuesdays because you felt productive on Monday. You fixed everything you saw on film. You put some new coaching points in. You added some new emphasis. Every position coach gave some players reminders. But by Tuesday, the practice field just looks slower. Like I mean, you were so excited. Yeah, we're gonna get this fixed this week. We're gonna turn this around. We're gonna have a great week of practice. And it's not because the players don't care, it's because their mental load just doubled. They're thinking about everything at once. And that's where you have to fall back in on clarity of decreasing that load on the players, and it really, really helps. Instead of practicing your system, now practice is reacting to last week. Every rep turns into remember this and don't forget that, or watch, look this, and that's one of the things I love about the air raid so much is it was systematic. I had a hodgepodge offense before I became a head coach, and learned the air raid. My first year as a head coach, first two jobs as a head coach, in fact, my first two jobs as a head coach, I was a pro eye guy. I was at the very beginning of kind of that 11 personnel look. But I just had a bunch of plays I didn't like, and learning the air raid it taught me that system, and then that really gave me this idea of I'm gonna practice my system over and over and over, and but when you're doing it like this, when you're losing your identity and you're letting this film run your practice, the focus shifts from what we do well to what went wrong, and that usually just gets you in trouble. And here's what coaches miss. Players don't play slow because they lack ability. They play slow because they're processing too much. They process slow. More information equals slower reactions. By Friday, they're not trusting rules. They're scanning for problems, and hesitation beats speed every time. And I just think that's really, really important. I go back to what I said at the beginning of the clinic with Mike Leach talking about, if I take something out, or to put something in, I got to take something out. You don't want to do that. I had a offensive coordinator buddy of mine that coached at a small D3 school, really, really successful up in the Shenandoah Mountains, and we were talking one day about going into a game planning thing, and I think the course is still up on Coach Two, but it was an offensive coordinators game roundtable, and one thing he said is he made sure that he didn't go into a game with his offensive line having more than 8 schemes, whether that be gap run, zone run, and protections, because he felt like that's all that they could handle. So think about that. If you don't want to ruin Tuesday, if you want to make those corrections and be clearer about what you're doing. Bad film doesn't ruin Friday. Overreaction ruins Tuesday, and Tuesdays determine Fridays. Strong coordinators don't add more, they narrow the focus so players can play fast again.